We are, of course, presenting all of this in conjunction with the Confederation of Indian Industry. So just a couple of hours now, 2 hours to be exact, before the Union Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman presents her budget. I don't know if we can, but let's try and roll some of the those images of Nirmala Sitharaman. She got out of her house. There was actually media tracking her all the way to the Finance Ministry, where she got off. Last final touches would be sort of being worked on as we speak right now before she goes to Parliament. The first time that the new Parliament will see a union budget being presented. So there is a huge sense of hope, expectation, anticipation. This is, of course, an election budget. The elections just around the corner. Mukesh Bhutani joins us. Jayajit still with us. So, Mr. Bhutani, first up off the top, if I was to ask you 2 or 3 of your key expectations, what would those be?
I think since this is an interim budget, I anticipate that there would be very few legislative developments or amendments that she will move. But I think on the policy front, there could be a lot of statements that could essentially lay down in anticipation of this government coming back, initiatives on major infrastructure investments, capital investments. Though the private sector investment is picking up, it's still not as strong as the government anticipated. So I would imagine that the thrust on infrastructure investment will continue. The usual budget, investment focus on the common man, the youth, the women, farmers, and which she has already indicated could be another area. So all in all, a budget for all, I would say, with the common man as the guiding theme. There could be indications on major reforms that are likely to follow in Finance Act 2, which would be anticipated in July. But those indications could perhaps come in today's announcement.
Saket Mitra joins us as well. He's a leading investment banker. Thanks very much, Mr. Mitra, for being with us. Over the last 1 year, we've seen our growth really being spurred by government spending on infrastructure. All of the experts that we've been speaking to in the last 1 hour or so have been talking about keeping on with this impetus on investments in infrastructure rollout at all levels. Do you believe that this is likely to be a key part of this budget? And how is this absolutely essential as we look at not just 7%, but going beyond 7% GDP growth?
Vishnu, I think there are 3 legs to infrastructure. One is, of course, the physical creation of assets, which will hopefully improve productivity of the economy, and with that will be coming in of the private sector investment to complement the government's efforts. The second is there's a knock-on effect in terms of employment, obviously, because as these efforts carry on, there is greater employment being generated, whether it's road projects, sports, etc. The third leg, which also is very important, is that we and the global economy is in the world of a major change of shifting over from carbon to sustainable energy, looking at new ways of reacting to business and information. So I think a lot of the infrastructure that we are going to be seeing going forward, I mean, we've seen that with the investments into the solar energy that the Honorable Prime Minister just announced. So I think there are 3 legs, and each of them is very important at the moment.
You know, Jayajit, just during the break, we were discussing something so important and yet something which inevitably never finds mention in the union budget. A budget to fight pollution. And the reason we're talking about this, and Mukesh would know, is that it's clean outside today in Delhi. Why? Because it rained overnight. And how? But as we struggle to breathe in the national capital and so many parts of the Indo-Gangetic plain, how is pollution not a union budget agenda? Isn't that shocking?
It's absolutely shocking. We have not seen it in the last 10 years ever. And we are talking about budget for healthcare. Health is directly getting impacted by pollution. Yeah. So if we are able to stop pollution, we are able to stop expenditure on health, where, we can diminish the expenditure on healthcare. Right to life is a fundamental right. If we are not stopping pollution, we are leading to a lot of deaths happening in the NCR region and rest of the country, because pollution is not just an NCR issue, it's right up to Calcutta and right down to Mumbai and so on and so forth. So it's not just a Delhi issue, it's a pan-India issue. The pollution comes from some other state, it gets into Delhi, from Delhi it goes to other places. So it's a central government issue, and we need to have a far more alacrity in how we fight pollution.
And, the people being impacted are in the prime of their lives. They are part of the economy. This is the heart of the economy which sustains our economic growth. So therefore, not just pollution, but if we talk about healthcare, how is it essential for us to focus on that?
I think when you look at the subject of climate, healthcare, environment, as per the constitutional framework, it falls both within the realm of the state and the federal government. I think, here I would like to see half glass empty rather than half glass full. Many baby steps being taken, but the question is, it's clearly not sufficient, as is evident from what at least Delhiites are experiencing, and I'm sure rest of the nation will experience. So this is perhaps a good theme for her to talk about, issues which are confronting most urbanites, which will combine both climate, health, and environment as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Mr. Mishra, there was a Kantar survey which was done about a week, 10 days back. And they said that 57% of those people they spoke to said that rising inflation was their primary concern, and job layoffs was a huge worry as well. How would you look at these concerns? Inflation, of course, is a concern year after year for various factors, but job layoffs, particularly in an era of artificial intelligence, etc., is obviously a new concern as well. How would you look at these problems?
Vishnu, inflation, I think, is a real worry. Especially with what's happening in the Middle East and our dependence on Middle Eastern oil. We've had disruption of trade flows, and I think there's a real risk that if that conflict sort of escalates, there will be an issue with pricing of energy, and that hits us straight away. As far as the job layoffs is concerned, I again see that as a glass half full, because while there is a rejigging of where jobs are, India actually has the largest pool of people trained in AI, for example, of some form or the other. So what we need to do is actually to look at having the government investing in things like digital infrastructure in a big way, which will enable creation of a new set of jobs which the next generation requires. So yes, there will be some amount of pain, but I am reasonably confident that as we go forward, perhaps our over-reliance on the pure services sector for employment creation is going to change because AI comes in and there's some degree of automation. But there'll be new jobs created because we actually have the largest pool of sort of fit-for-purpose young people in the world. And I think it's a real chance we can actually become sort of not the oil sheikhs for the next 50 years, but we can become the AI and digital sheikhs for the next 50 years, providing products that the world uses, especially in developing countries. So whether it's Africa, whether it's parts of LDC, Asia, there is a huge world that's opening up, and where India has a natural advantage, both in terms of our HR as well as our availability of data.
Mr. Bhutani, exporting digital services is something where India has been cost competitive for a while now. It's an area of real excellence. And then, you've got AI easily available, not necessarily very expensive, which is a real churn in the digital economy. Do you believe that some of the big gains that we've made in exporting digital services could be impacted?
I must confess, I'm not an AI expert, but my fellow panelists
I will come to JJ
can talk about it. But yes, I think interestingly, if you look at the survey that was released yesterday by the Chief Economic Advisor, it makes specific mention talking about threats that AI poses. And this is not just about threats for India, but many, many other advanced economies, particularly as a services economy, whether AI poses threat for employability is a critical factor.
Let me interrupt you for half a second. That's the finance minister. She's photo opportunities now outside North Block, outside the Ministry of Finance. I think that's a tablet that she actually has inside that. It's not the old briefcase that we used to see Mr. Chidambaram, Manmohan Singh and others sort of carry. It's a tablet inside that. That's what she's going to... So that's clearly a part of literally our digital
Perhaps
economy
an
right
iPad
there.
made in India.
Perhaps an iPad made, I shouldn't say iPad, well, an iPad made in India, because iPads are now, I believe, made in India, or a tablet certainly. But look at the interest in the budget. You know, there was a camera tracking her as she left her home right to the office, almost paparazzi style.
That's right.
And now she's headed to Parliament. So that's, but continue with your thoughts about the concerns on AI that you have before I go across to him. Being a disruptor is the word I was looking for.
AI clearly is a disruptor. The question is whether it impacts the employability. I mean, we shouldn't forget that though India has moved up the value chain insofar as acting as a services back office in high areas, but to what extent AI is going to impact those routine services is something that needs to be seen. And I think a fair bit of not just the country's ability to earn foreign exchange, but also the employability of many service sector professionals is contingent upon what trajectory AI takes.
Jajit, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier also, it'll have serious impact. If you look at the voice-based exports that we have, that's going to get impacted by voice bots. Already chatbots have taken over, both in domestic services as well as exports. So both are going to get impacted. If you look at the capability of India to develop those AI services, clearly the government has taken some significant steps. Bhashini as a LLM model is coming through. But on a larger scale, if you look at fundamental AI, especially the generative AI, the resources required are humongous. The kind of, an additional AI data center for Google requires 1 gigawatt of energy, which is almost 1/7 of what Delhi consumes.
Yeah.
We can't afford that. No. The kind of data that we need is still not there. Even if the government pitches in with its own data, we don't have the kind of data that is needed to create the kind of AI that is required and which will be acceptable. And the more we delay, the more we are falling behind, because AI is now being used to create more AI. For annotating the data, for vectorization of data. It's AI which is stepping in and doing it. So if we don't have those technologies, we'll keep falling back faster and faster.
Mr. Mishra, you had a point? Go ahead.
I can't agree more with Jayajit. It's, chatbots are already almost seen as passé as far as AI goes. And the point that he made about creating their own programs. I think the risk, for example, to all our IT companies that are fundamentally providing a lot of coding. Now, a lot of that is going to be done automatically. So we need to invest literally as of yesterday. And it's not one LLM model. We should be looking at 20 different LLM models across, industries, whether it's healthcare, things that we're good at, finance, healthcare, education, and invest in. And as he said, it's not the private sector that can invest in it. It needs government intervention. We have last year, $27 billion were spent by just in terms of investment into AI globally, of which 70% came from the top 4 or 5 companies. So Microsoft, Google, Amazon. Now we need to compete with that sort of money as a country in order to create the jobs, in order to actually not allow for the lack of a better word, a new colonial pattern of trade emerging, where we need to buy stuff that is actually created from our own data. So it's literally, I think it's an emergency situation in terms of us broadening our vision in terms of what AI and Gen AI is going to be, instead of just talking about not merely chatbots or automation. It's much beyond that. It's much beyond that.
All right, let me go across to my colleague Sakshi Bajaj, who's been tracking the markets very closely. Give us an idea of what you're seeing or what you're likely going to see in the next little while. Go ahead, Sakshi.
Absolutely, Vishnu. Like you said, markets opening marginally in the green. We see a 0.25% uptick on both the benchmark indices, just ahead of the interim budget. So a clear sign of positive territory right there. Of course, we'll have to track the markets throughout the day. Remember, historically, we have seen a bit of volatility on budget day, and we'll really have to see the announcements and the impact they have on sectoral indices as such. So like you were mentioning, AI and jobs with the experts. So of course, job generation is one of the key asks really. Will, of course, we see a green energy fund? That is a key key industry ask as well. Of course, we have spoken to consumers and viewers alike, and of course, salary class really looking at an income tax relief, and many really saying, look, will the agriculture sector and the rural economy get that much needed push? Remember the PM Kisan scheme, many are expecting that annual amount that farmers were getting, if that is hiked from 6,000 rupees to 9,000 rupees, that will essentially account for inflation in the last 5 years. And really, will that then be done? So there are these key asks really and key expectations. Of course, Nari Shakti and youth and jobs really to drive economic growth going forward. India can now aspire to be a 7 trillion economy, but will the interim budget give in to those asks?
That is absolutely crucial. In fact, that point on the need for a green energy fund, that's something we're going to be looking at very closely. That's going to be in our discussion coming up after this short break. Do stay tuned. Welcome back. Just a little while from now, an hour and a half or so, when before the union budget is presented, Nirmala Sitharaman is already in Parliament, headed to Parliament. But let's just go straight across to my colleague Vasudha Venugopal, who's also been tracking all of these developments leading up to the budget. It is a political budget. It is an election budget. The election's just around the corner. How much of this is going to be playing on the mind of the finance minister of the government as she gets set to present this budget? Vasudha, it's across to you.
So Nirmala Sitharaman, the Finance Minister of India, is all set to present the interim budget in a few minutes from now. She's made it very clear that this is the interim budget. It's vote on account, so there are not going to be any spectacular announcements. But 2019 precedent makes us think otherwise, because 2019 saw the announcement of the Kisan Samman Nidhi, which subsequently became the most important flagship program of the government for farmers. So there are many speculations as to what kind of relief measures could be announced, and how would the government make the new tax regime attractive? Will it simplify processes, or will it introduce relief measures? Nari Shakti has been the flavor of the season. So what is it that women can expect? And more importantly, what are we going to do to ensure that we keep meeting or at least reducing our fiscal deficit? What about infra? And what about rural India and skilling and digital India? Many questions out there. All of that will be answered in a few minutes from now, few hours from now. 11 a.m. is when the finance minister starts reading out the budget. I have with me Sajan Kumar, who is an academic researcher and also a political commentator. Sajan, thank you for speaking to NDTV. So the politics of this is also very interesting, because this is the first budget in the new parliament. Yesterday, Draupadi Murmu spoke very eloquently on the highlights, on the achievements of the government. Prime Minister made it very clear that he's very confident about a third term. So how do you see the symbolism of this, and what do you think could be the expectations around this interim budget?
Yeah, generally being the interim budget, expectations are low, and the government has also indicated that no spectacular announcements. But interaction with the market reveals one thing, that usually February happen to be a volatile month because of lots many anxieties, lots many uncertainty about the announcements are there. But this time, if you see, the anxiety is less, reason being that there seems to be some sort of a confidence in the corporate world about the political and the policy continuity. So this may be a time wherein government will not come with a big announcement, but will lay down the visions. Now, which sectors will emerge as the central sectors? One could be the big push is going to be into the rural landscape of India in terms of the infrastructure. That is one. Two, it could be about the kind of continuity of the policies, which is about the welfare schemes, housing for all and other measures, empowering measures, and that is a sentiment positive measures for the sector, and electorally also very important. Third, we are expecting that green energy is going to be a...
Of course, we've had this biofuels and solar alliance, and there are so many international commitments that India has made with respect to G20 platform and also COP28. But Sajan, the government of India review also says that 45% of India's workforce is in agriculture. So, like you said, rural India is something that is also waiting with a lot of expectations.
Yeah, see, 45% of India workforce is still in agriculture, and one of the push is that rural is not entirely agrarian. Rural India is not just about the agrarian sector, and therefore you need to create infrastructure and other empowering infrastructural measures so that a section of the rural people workforce also doesn't migrate, but within the rural scape shifts to the non-agrarian kind of sector, and that is one of the things that we are expecting, that government is going to go for a massive infrastructural push in the rural India, and along with and that will empower automatically the poorer section of the women, Dalits, OBCs, tribals, and lots many other sort of things. So this is one sector. Also, this is a time, mind it, wherein government may lay down the vision that may be executed in the July. I mean, once the new government is formed.
Right.
And that way we are witnessing that along with the smart cities motto, you also may get a hint like something like the smart villages, and that is something also that corporate and the market is also looking, because the urban and the metropolitan areas are almost saturated, and rural push is going to be. So you talk about the Nari Shakti, you talk about weaker sections, you talk about the farmers, you talk about the rural landscape who are non-farmers also.
Right. Sachin, there's been a lot of expenditure on spending on infra, but if you look at both investment spending and government spending on infra, that's been growing. Yeah. But what about private spending? And that's also connected with our fiscal deficit, and that is something that I know a lot of government officials have been worried about. We have a very good tax buoyancy, and that is why we have been meeting our targets. Do you think that is something that the government will be interested in? Because we have seen huge expenditure allocation for infrastructure in the last few years, and do you see that paying off for the government?
This is exactly paying you, because it is creating a positive impetus for the private spending also, investment also, because there are two kind of things. One, the infrastructural base should be there for the private investors and private investing. Second, there should be a kind of continuity and certainty about the political and policy continuity, which is the case. And that is why you see even in those states which used to attract very less investment, say for example Uttar Pradesh, right now if you go into the corporate sector, there is a huge interest and huge investments are expected to arrive there, land there. And similar sort of push is expected into those states, except for the southern and the western states. You see, the central, eastern and the northern states have been attracting very less investment, and that is why this is new area wherein the infrastructural push is happening, and the kind of big expressways, the kind of other electricity, and along with that policy continuity, along with all that also you see the kind of law and order plank that is there. Right. And that certainly has started attracting investment from the private sector, and that will also boost the consumption kind of ratio by the general people, which market is concerned about.
Yeah. Sachin, Nari Shakti, like I said, has been the flavor of the season. We saw EPFO make this wonderful announcement that government employees, female employees, can also nominate their children. That looks at different diverse families. And also we saw many ministries come out with this thing that even highway workers, female workers, need to have maternity and miscarriage leaves. Now, these are wonderful progressive measures, and clearly there is a lot of emphasis on self-help groups. Yeah. So you look at the Jan Dhan accounts, almost 58% belong to women now. So government seems to be working in the direction of ensuring that there is more women participation in labour force. But if you look at data, it's the urban educated women who are also falling out of this whole workforce. What do you think is happening? Is there any politics in that? Are there any social conditions which are sort of driving this?
The reason is simple. The urban and metropolitan women workforce which is getting away is an impact of not government policy, but because of the post-pandemic scenario wherein the corporate sector is yet to recover the kind of losses. This is one. And therefore they have to go for the lay-down measures and cutting the workforce, etc. But on the positive side, if you see, there is also another push that is coming, especially for the rural landscape. The good politics never used to be good economics. That was the common wisdom. But now you see the good politics and economics both are in sync, and that is why the kind of expectation that is happening when the government policies and the economic measures wherein the gender is becoming default unit of inclusion analysis is also paying rich dividend to the party and the ruling politics in terms of electorally. And that is why in rural areas you find that politics and economy are in sync, be it women, etc. Urban areas, because it's most about the post-pandemic kind of a shock that the corporate and the market witnessed. I think that will also be recovered in due time.
So will good politics also lead to good economics? That is what we will be seeing in a few minutes from now. Thank you, Sachin, for joining us. Time for a short break. We'll be back in a bit.
Welcome back. Just 1 hour, 25 minutes before the union budget is presented. I just wanted to go back to Mukesh Bhutani. We'll be talking extensively about taxes in a couple of hours from now. I suspect everybody wants to know about whether they're going to be paying more or paying less. Last time around, the finance minister spent a great deal of time talking about the new tax regime. Has enough been done to incentivize this?
I think that the whole rationale behind giving an option to the taxpayer was to simplify the tax structure for individuals. It's complex in the sense that erstwhile provisions in the income tax law provided a host of deductions for savings instruments, medical insurance. These changes were carried out at two levels. I think the first time the change was carried out was in the 2022 budget, which I felt was not marketed as well, and hence the taxpayers were confused. So they carried out another major rehaul in the 23 budget, effectively forcing the taxpayer to a more simplified regime. I don't think that it really addressed all the concerns that the taxpayers had insofar as the options that were given. But I think the larger intent seems to be simplify it to an extent that you take away all of these exemptions and deductions, bring the taxpayer to a lower rate of tax, particularly people who are not subjected to surcharge and people who have income about 10 lakh rupees. I don't see major changes that would be carried out this year, but I would imagine that the continuing tax reforms to simplify the individual tax system will continue in successive budgets.
Yeah. Mr. Mishra, you know, one of the problems, I don't know if you can actually use that word, or concerns with the new tax regime was, those who viewed it as disincentivizing savings, as those investments available in the old regime did not apply to those who opted for the new tax regime. Is this something that the government needs to work on?
Vishnu, I don't think it's a very major issue. I think in the new tax regime, there is enough flexibility for people to actually continue to gain as long as they're investing for the long term. I do not expect a lot of change happening beyond what's been offered last year. I think the new tax regime is the norm. People need to sort of come to terms with it and move forward with it.
Jayjit, one of the big areas which I'm sure they'll be mentioned in the budget is on housing, and that affects our economy profoundly, every single level. Let's talk about our urban spaces, the fact that housing is becoming increasingly unaffordable in places like Delhi, Bombay, Hyderabad, Bengaluru, Chennai certainly. Is this an area, affordable housing for the middle classes, that the government needs to focus on?
I think absolutely yes, and the government has been focusing on it both for urban and rural. I think the other phenomena is the fact that there is no differentiation between urban and rural as we move forward. If you look at Kerala, it's a complete continuum. And I think the government needs to move towards that kind of a regime. Having said that, housing is a powerhouse for the economy. Where 22% of the entire economy is construction and housing, and it drives consumption of plastics, wire, and so on and so forth, as we are all aware of. But surprisingly, what is happening is that in spite of the increase in cost, the realty business is right now booming. The real estate is really booming. But having said that, your point about affordable housing, wherein people are able to get a house, is an important point to focus on. But I think what the government may want to move away from is from house ownership to access to housing. Yeah. The difference essentially is that let investors come in and buy these houses and rent them out, right, and let them take the risk of high costs, so that at least people get access to housing. So I will look forward to that kind of a change. Instead of focusing on house ownership, it will be access to housing, which will really make a difference, and also more simplification in terms of the rental acts, because they limit the ability to for those who are owning these houses to give them out on rent. About 10 to 15% of houses are actually locked up because nobody is willing to give them out on rent. If you just open that up, that itself will bring in significant amount of supplies into the market.
Yeah. Any thoughts on housing?
Just to carry forward what Jayjit was saying, I think housing as a sector clearly has a multiplier effect. If you look at housing, you need to affordable housing for the middle class. You need to look at it in many which ways. One is housing and consumer finance. I think there in an era where we are living in high interest rates, it's a challenge really for the middle class to afford the current interest rates to finance a house. I think the larger focus seems to be developing infrastructure, developing satellite cities, developing connectivity, because all of this is going to take away the focus of housing from the expensive to the affordable housing sector. Because if you have good connectivity, then the housing sector is likely to boom further. So the focus seems to be focus on infrastructure, urbanization, transportation, mobility, such that satellite towns and away from the center gives an opportunity to develop affordable housing for the middle class. I think that is going to be the key in my view. And insofar as the financing is concerned, hopefully if the interest rates are looking on a downward trajectory, I think this sector, in my view, is a very, very promising sector to create that multiplier effect for the construction and other forms of industries which support housing.
Absolutely. Well, we're going to take a short break at this stage, continue with our focus on various aspects of the economy, our huge expectations ahead of a huge budget which comes up in about 1 hour, 20 odd minutes. So my colleague Manvi Siradhilan up next with some very special interviews as we continue with our non-stop coverage of every aspect of the budget. And remember, after it's all presented, starting at 11 o'clock, there'll be reactions to the budget, several key interviews with ministers as well, and a lot more. Do stay tuned.